Hello everybody, Oliver G here from the Earful Tower. This is a chat with Australian movie director and war photographer Scott Hillier, who runs the European Independent Film Festival, which this year is celebrating 19 years. You can go to Montparnasse and watch it on the 19th, 20th and 21st of April. In fact, I've even got some free tickets. I say at the end of the episode how you can get them if you're quick. Short note, Scott is as I said, a war photographer. He has seen some things and he mentions a few things in this episode, which if you're a sensitive listener, it might not be for you. But we do talk a lot about Paris, but we do talk about September 11, where he was filming. We talk about Africa. We talk about Russia. We talk about it's a very wide-ranging conversation, and I thought it was very interesting indeed. I hope you do too. Let's get into the episode with some music from Press Maxon, and I want to send out a huge thanks to all the Patreon members who keep this boat floating. Let's get into it. Scott Hillier, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
It was my great pleasure. I want to start with your surname, Hillier. I love it.
Yeah, well, it's very, very weird. It's got French background, they all say.
I didn't even think.
Yeah, my wife and my daughter go, Hillier. So it sort of works just
It's almost
fine.
confusing because it sounds like Ilya.
Yeah.
Like there is a.
There
Yeah, there is a. Ilya, Hillier. It's a good, Scott Hillier. It's a good name. Perfect for a director.
That's what they say.
Yeah, which is what you are. And we're going to talk about your life, your time in Paris, what you're doing here and your film festival. But I think we should start with Paris. I have a suspicion that you see this city differently because you see the world through a lens. Now, the work that you do is a mix of all kinds of different stuff, but it's all through a lens, right? So how does this city compare with everything else?
Well, first of all, I've been here for 30 years and I love this city.
Right.
Just love every element of it. Because
element?
Because it's always too easy to find the positives.
Right.
To find the negatives.
Right.
It's always too easy to find the negatives.
Yeah.
I've never chosen the easy path. And I'd rather find an easy path to find the great things. We can skip past the negatives. They're there, of course, anywhere in paradise. They're there. I skip for the positives at all time. And I love this city. Particularly as, I'm sitting opposite you right now. I can see the light coming down, hitting you in a different way. Fine, we're in a studio. But I see that in Paris every minute of every day, the way that the light comes down through the trees, the way this building was built there and it turns like this, the way the angles of the street go like this. So I'm always looking at pictures.
What is it with the Paris light? I've had photographers on the show before and they're like, the light.
It's
how can the light be different in Paris?
I don't think it's different because, in the Middle East, I spent a lot of my life in the Middle East. The Middle Eastern light is like warm caramel sort of coating your body and stuff like that, and it's great. But then you've got the desert.
I think I want to be where the caramel is.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds good.
Well, here you've got the caramel at 10 o'clock on a hot August night. But then you're also in the Marais, and you've got the history, and I'm a history freak, big-time history freak. So when I can put back the sort of mental aspect of the history of where we're in the Marais with this light coming down and the people and this and the waiters all dressed up in their thing and, the old women with their poodles at the thing drinking and the way the light catches them. It's cinema. It's cinematic. That's all I can say.
Well said. Is that annoying though for people hanging out with you when you're always like, that looks so beautiful, or is that
you have no idea?
Is it really? Is it
like people watching a film with me? Yes, but it's sheer. I think having spent all my life making images and manipulating images into films, this is just the city for it.
Right.
And it's I see everything visually, and it's great. And this city is Rome's a beautiful city and is whatever, but Paris just seems to have it. The low light. It's sort of in between the low sort of when you're up in Sweden and stuff like that when it's low a lot longer. The low winter light here just like cuts like a knife, but like at shoulder height. And then at, late at night on an August night when the sunlight is just melting down upon you, it's incredible.
It's always interesting to hear people who have you think like that. That's how you, do you pull out your camera phone and film things when you get that?
I mean, I do. That's, I have huge cameras at my office with great lenses, so I'm always disappointed when I take out my phone and I'm sort of messing around with the exposure to try and get that because the lenses doesn't get it to me. But every now and again I would just say, I'm going to take this. It's not going to be real, but I'm just going to take it.
Yeah. Just to catch it, just to capture that little bit of Paris. Let's talk a little bit about your CV. So you've done all sorts of things. It says when you've worked. So let's get this Oscar story right. You're an Oscar winner. The movie.
I was in New York City during 9/11.
Right.
And I'd spent 9 months working with both the New York City Police Department and also the New York City Fire Department, making TV shows, reality TV shows. And I will truncate this story because it's very long.
It's not Paris either.
And it's not Paris. But I'd spent time working with both of them, a long time.
Right.
And on the day the towers fell down, I was always in the office at 5:15. That was my mantra. And I had edit suites going 24/7. And I was always there. And there was a truck underneath us, a fire truck we'd worked on. But that morning, how weird this is, I decided to take my daughter to a French school. Took her to the French school, sat in a cafe, had a coffee, read my New York Times, got into the metro and came up, there was 3,000 messages on my phone.
Yeah, wow.
And, I'm like, then I start calling. So I find out what's happening. I start calling my mates in the fire department and the police department because I wanted to go in there. I wanted to be down there with them because I knew them. They knew me.
Yeah.
I'm a war cameraman.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get hold of them, got messages from them, raced in the office. There were no cameras. We'd send our cameras back. So I'm running around in like a business, suit, basically.
Right.
Finally find a camera, run down, take a taxi down as far as I can to the city, try to get into the towers, long, complicated story, don't make it, and leave. And the guy that I was trying to get into, and I was shooting all the time, and the guy that I was trying to get in with was one of the major sort of New York City emergency services cops, shot 5 times, but younger than me, craziest guy ever.
Right.
I was calling his phone all day, and finally, like about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, someone picked it up. I said, Joey, and he's like, and this guy goes, I'm an EMT worker, I've just found this phone.
Wow.
And I knew that he was gone. Anyway, so then Hollywood kicked in. So I was making all these films for Dick Wolf, the guy that makes Law and Order.
Right.
And so we did a great edit of 90 minutes of, the whole Twin Towers, and then Joe Viggiano and his brother, one was a cop and one was a firefighter, and they both died that day. And so anyway, we made this amazing 1.5-hour documentary, and the guys in Hollywood went, this is the year for the Bowling for Columbine. We're going to chop your film down to 23 minutes, put it in a couple of cinemas, and we'll win an Oscar. And we did.
Wow.
And so,
so how does that puts, so this podcast, I won an award for it once. I call it an award-winning podcast, right? Did that open a lot of doors for you? I mean, that's,
Yes, it does, because I think that, having any award, I think, does matter, because you can say, because that means the sort of, recognition, hopefully by peers. An Oscar is in an industry where I work in, where there's a lot of haters.
Yeah.
That's a hard one to hate.
Yeah.
I made a very conscious decision. I was offered to go to LA and to do this and do that, and I stuck with Paris. I wanted my daughter to grow up here, and she's grown up very successfully.
Look at you bringing it back to Paris. I like it.
Yeah,
You've got a daughter. Was she born in Paris?
Born in Paris.
So how did this happen? An Australian, with 2 Australians, ended up in Paris. What's going on? How did this happen for you?
I mean, I met a girl and moved here and had a daughter. And
what year did you get here?
I got here in late 92, early 93, but I was spending 6 weeks in Bosnia and 6 weeks in Somalia doing that type of thing.
Gosh, what a juxtaposition. They're in the 90s and then coming to Paris, which I don't know what Paris was like in the early 90s, but I imagine it was a lot calmer than down there.
Well, I mean, it was a lot different. I was always, you come out of Mogadishu, you go to Kenya to sort of unwind and have a shower and have a drink in a bar, and then all of a sudden, bang,
right,
you're in Paris.
I asked Patricia Wells about, she came here in 1980. You came here in 1993. I asked her to tell what it was like. Can you tell our listeners what this city was like in the early 90s?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say that I listened to Patricia's thing. And Patricia, if you're listening, I'm a big-time hero. We've bumped into each other socially a couple of times.
She might well be listening.
Yeah, I hope so. The all-time hero and a great podcast. I love listening to it.
Thank you.
The pneumatic things under the city, I think, is just a fabulous story, because they used to go from here to that.
She blew my brain with that one, I think.
Well, the French invented the internet. way before.
Yeah, I got into that conversation on this podcast once, and then they dropped it.
Well, no, when I first moved here in the 90s, they had the Minitel.
Yeah, right.
You'd get in front of this box and you'd punch in things and you could order train tickets. I'm like going...
So when you came here in the 90s, this was like a sort of like a Scandinavian, you know what I mean? Like they're just ahead of it, and that was the vibe.
Well, and they invented the credit card with the chip.
Yeah,
so we all, the perception of the French not doing anything, sitting around drinking wine and eating cheese and stuff like that is true to some things, but they're also really tech savvy.
Yeah. Well, are they still?
I mean, I just did some films with some guys who are... I'm going to tell you a really stupid fact. I talk too much. You can cut this out if you want.
It's a podcast. You can do it.
Lots of friends, lots of people make a lot of films for a lot of things. Some guy calls me up and says, "Hey, I want you to do this." So I'm working for Amazon Prime behind the scenes in the Paris Opera. I want to tell you a really quick story about that later. But we're in there doing the opera, and the next day I'm in a cement factory. And I'm like, okay, this is my life. War zones and Paris. And then... you know what the second most used material in the world except for water is?
Yeah, it must be cement. Yeah, look at that.
I mean, I set you up,
yeah,
but...
You set me up.
But it's
cement from Paris.
No. Well, these guys are in the suburbs of Paris working on a way to actually make cement without... Their carbon footprint is bigger than anything else in the world.
Right.
Just making cement, mainly in China.
Yeah.
And... So, the French are doing this. There's another bunch that I worked for as well the other day. They're actually trapping carbon and actually turning it back into things that are going to replace plastic. So I think the French are there.
So they've still got their finger on the pulse of...
100%.
But was
quietly.
That, when you came here in 1992, 93, what was do you feel like it was a whole different world, a whole different era? Do you still find the city's about the same as it was then?
I mean, the city... aesthetically hasn't changed
since 1870,
since whenever,
yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of it. They tried and they messed it up. They messed it up with La Défense and down there in the 15th. But it hasn't changed that much. I mean, I think one thing that I will mention is the fact that in 1995 we had dozens of advanced knowledge bombings on metros here.
Right.
And I think that's one thing a lot of people forgot. I mean, these guys were sticking bombs on trains in metros in 95. There's been a lot of that sort of stuff that sort of people don't associate that with Paris that much, but that was definitely happening. But France always just seems to move slowly. Like if you have a house in France, it never goes up and down like it does in London or New York. It's all just very steady and steady because the French live in boxes. They don't like sort of, entrepreneur is obviously a French word.
How's that for you then? You can say...
It took me forever to actually find some status to live in. And my mother-in-law, I love her dearly, but she still has no idea. The phone rings, I get on an aeroplane, I come back and I put money in the bank. And she's like, how does that work?
Right.
And I'm like, well, that just kind of works. She's like,
why is that I agree with you. Like the whole entrepreneurialism here. I know there are a lot of young guys and girls doing really cool things here, but it is like when I got stories when I set up this podcast as a company recently that it was very complicated.
25 years ago, man, I couldn't be paid here because they're like, well, where do we get our taxes? I'm like, I'll pay your taxes. And but you need this, and this. And the other thing that I find funny, and we're bouncing off Paris for a second, but is the fact that people in my family have got a large extended French family. As soon as these kids go to school or in university, they start talking about retirement. And I'm like, guys, no, don't think about retirement. You're 22 years of age. Go buy a surfboard and and a plane ticket to Indonesia and go surfing. And the parents are like, no, he's got to save for his retirement.
Really?
And I'm like, my goodness, don't do that.
Do you find that there are a lot of, as an Australian, and you told me that you're from what sounded like the middle of nowhere in Australia. You grew up really...
even further past nowhere.
In Queensland, right?
Yeah.
So for people around the world who've maybe never heard of Queensland, this is, it's like bananas and stuff up there?
No. So basically, my little brother right now is Crocodile Dundee, if anyone's old enough to know what Crocodile Dundee is.
Yeah, of course. I think everyone knows Crocodile Dundee.
So we grew up on a farm. There was 6 of us, 6 kids. And we grew up on a farm 160 kilometers, 100 miles from a town. Now, when I tell people in France that it was 160 kilometers from a town, they go, oh, your town was that? I'm like, no, our house was 160 kilometers from a town. And they look at me and go, okay. And, I did school on the radio. We had correspondence. A truck would drive out once every couple of weeks with the mail and your school lessons, and you'd send them back.
Will you tell me what year this was?
81, 80s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Right, okay.
And, you do a half an hour lesson on the air. And the Friday was always the singing, which you can imagine if you're stuck in the bush. And we would go to town once every 6 months. So we were just working, you do school in the morning, you'd work on the farm.
Yeah.
We had thousands of cows and more thousands of sheep. And you just do that.
How crazy how different your life has become. I wonder if it's like a sort of running away from that.
Well, I sort of put it down to several things, but my mother was a great reader.
Right.
And she used to ship out cartons of books, a lot of them Mills and Boon's stupid romantic things, which is very weird for her to read them, but just books. So I was just reading books all the time. And so I had this sort of other world happening in my head. And listened to music on the radio. My stepfather couldn't deal with listening to music because what would you do that for? But reading and whatever. And then when I finally went out, I wanted to get out. And I had no choice in the matter, actually, but I needed to get out. And then the idea of now I've lived in New York and Rome and Paris and London and a lot of time in Russia and the Middle East, and I still keep on going. And good thing is nobody at home understands one single thing of what I do or say, so I just say nothing. But I still love it back there, and I go back there. But running away, but I just want to see it all.
Yeah. Where do you live in Paris?
In the 17th, just behind the Arc de Triomphe.
Okay. Have you always been around that sort of area?
Batignolles. I heard you talking with Ali about Montmartre. I lived in the Batignolles for 10 years, and it hurts my heart every time I walk past it because I love the Batignolles so much.
Really?
Yeah, just I found it astounding. And
which part of the? Because I feel like I never really conquered Batignolles.
Really?
What's that? I just
the little church at the end of the street there.
You mean
right
by
the park?
The little square there?
The square.
Yeah, okay, that is pretty charming.
Yeah, and then all the houses. I lived in a sort of a beautiful 4-bedroom apartment with an interior courtyard with trees and birds and stuff like that. And you think, this is the center of Paris?
That's so far from tourists' radar, I'd say.
Which was absolutely even better.
Yeah.
There were no tourists down there, but I don't think that I know of a more rustic, authentic, French Parisian part of town than the Batignolles.
It could be the best kept secret. It could maybe the 14th, but the 17th is
just has it all for me. Just has it all.
Let's talk a bit about. You said something interesting before we started. You said that I can't remember what it was. You won an award for a short film that you made, and it really helped you with your career, and perhaps inspired you to start giving the same opportunity to others.
Yeah, I got caught by a Russian bomber in Chechnya. And for anybody who's ever been underneath a plane when they drop bombs, they'll understand that there's nothing you cannot describe it. Absolutely, you can't. And only after somebody looks at you in the eyes and go, "Oh, you were that scared," and you're like, the marrow freezes in your bones.
No, what do you mean exactly? You were under a...
We were in Grozny in Chechnya,
right?
When the Russians were attacking.
They were bombing you from above. You were you were like in an apartment or something?
Oh no, we were outside.
Wow.
We were outside filming these Chechen soldiers underneath a bit of gas, and they used to break in the gas pipes just to have a bit of thing. It was December,
right?
So it was like minus 20 degrees.
Wow.
And there were all these civilians around this thing. They were bombing the main building, and we were about 2 miles back. And they came in, and it was horrible. We went to the ground, and there were 6 of us, and only 2 got up and were sort of wiping brains and blood and all that sort of stuff off us. And I know this very well, but as soon as after an airstrike, they wait about 45 seconds, and then they throw in mortars. And so I knew I had 45 seconds, me and this other guy, to get across the road where they were shooting at us. And I had this major moment that I always wanted to do this, but it was like a sort of a crazy Starsky and Hutch thing where I was running as fast as I could towards this window. And I just had a bulletproof jacket and a helmet on and just jumped through it. Bang, glass.
Wow.
And we're just laying there, and as soon as we hit the ground, the mortars started coming in because the people that were injured in the airstrike are screaming. And so people go out to help them, and then the mortars come in. So anyway,
what an unusual story for the Earful Tower Paris.
I'm sorry, but anyway, so
wow, goodness me.
Yeah, so we did that, and and then I came back and very, very complicated way to come back, and did it all. But I made a film about that called Behind the Eyes of War, just to sort of, when you go through certain experiences and you sort of want to try and explain a little bit about what's happening up here.
Right.
And also the thing is that I still have all these clever young things working in my office who say that, when you go to war and you press that, nobody touches you.
Yeah.
I had a lot of people, including one of my girlfriends, died in war zones, and you're as much of a target as anybody else.
Wow.
And so I wanted to tell this story, and it won a big award in New York City. And this little piece of paper totally changed my career, as in the fact that, it gave me self-confidence as an award-winning film director.
Right.
My peers looked at me differently. Producers looked at me differently. My clients looked at me differently. And so that was that. And then I shot the film that won the Academy Award. Then I came back to Paris, and everyone was just like, who cares? What do you know about films? The Parisians can be a little bit disdainful of foreigners coming in, and particularly in cinema, which is what they invented.
Right.
But then I, in a peak of slight anger at the establishment, I created the European Independent Film Festival.
So this is 19 years ago?
19 years ago
Okay.
now.
And for people who have no idea what you're talking about, what is this?
Nobody ever has any idea what I'm talking about.
No, I imagine I hope your staff will be listening to this episode.
Yeah. Well, they've turned off by now. So it's called ECU, the European Independent Film Festival, and we our mantra is to discover, project, and promote the world's best independent films. Mm-hmm. And so many people say, what's an independent film? An independent film has soul. And as a film director when I make a big film for Christian Dior or somebody, I'm making a film for them. When I'm making my film, it's a film by Scott Hillier. And I live and breathe and sit behind every frame of that film because that's my story. That's what I want to tell. You listen to people, but it's as a writer, as a journalist, or you're writing your own book. It's you have to stand behind that. And there are people out there like me who are driven to tell stories and cinematic stories. I've got the training, as other people do, to turn these into things that you can put up on a big screen. And I, as a film director, we're riven by lack of self-confidence and self-disgust and doubt, and are we doing the right things? When you sit in that seat and the lights go down and that light and it flickers on the screen and your story is there, you freeze up a little bit up inside because you're like, will they like it? Will they? Won't they? And when they clap and they say, "Wow, good job," you've told a story, and as storytellers, that's what we like to do. So, started the film festival. We've been going for 19 years, and we've also started the same thing in Africa, Asia, and in the Americas. And it's all about, I was saying before that, I think stories are the fabric of our souls, and people who were spending so much time on their phones, and Patricia Wells was saying this before, when you're in Paris, put your phone away. You don't need it. Get lost. Get lost. Just walk around and look at it. And, that's a visual story. But, I think a good story can actually touch you, can change the way you think a little bit. It's very hard to change people, but telling good stories that they can relate to, hearing a good story just makes you feel good.
So is that what makes for a good independent movie for for you guys? Is it like you're looking for a good storytelling? Or?
That's all it is. And the fact that there's a lot of film festivals out there that have genre. We don't have a genre. We have tell me a good story and tell it well.
It's like feature-length movies? Or
we've got 16 categories. So we've got features and shorts and animations, experimental, students, documentaries, of course.
Right.
We've got a section for, we have an award for excellent in women's filmmaking.
Cool.
Because, I've worked in this industry for a long time and there's not enough women filmmakers that get the breaks. And stopping on that, two of the best war cameramen that I've ever worked with and took steps way beyond what I ever did and worked harder and better are two girls, two women from CNN, Cindy and Maria. You just can't beat them. So when I got into this industry, after having grown up on a farm where my sister could work as hard and long as I could, to going to a war where the best were women, to working in the film industry where all of a sudden it's just like, oh no. I'm like, what are you talking about? All of my first camera assistants always ever in my life have been women. And so we push that a lot. So, tell me a good story, tell it well.
Right. And for people who are in Paris, April 19th, 2021.
Yep.
So that's like showings of the films, and then
we're showing 53 films from 26 countries up in Montparnasse.
And there's like the jury, or is that how it works? And at the end, we
award the things. So
how exciting!
Stressful. Look at these grey hairs. But
Cool. Okay, so that's something that people who are in Paris can check out. Otherwise, you stream it as well. There'll be links below, or it's a good thing for people to have on their radar when we're talking about film festivals, independent films. And I want to pull it back to something you mentioned. You mentioned the opera, the Paris Opera, and then you can get back to it. I assume that you've had access to... I assume you've got a story about that, but I assume you've had access to some pretty cool stuff around Paris.
Well, I mean, and that's the great thing. Yeah. You know, the backstage that I've seen all around the world.
Let me know next time you need someone to hold the microphone or something.
I was in the Palais Congrès one night, and somebody says, okay, Lou Reed's coming to town, but you can only film, 1 minute of his first song.
Yeah.
Like, okay. So we turn up, and backstage you've got cameras and all this, and we get in the elevator, and Lou Reed's in the elevator.
Wow.
And I'm like, hey. He's like, well, I guess you're the video crew. I'm like, well, I guess you're Lou Reed. And he's like, there. So we just went in there and then filmed. But the Paris Opera, I'm working on an Amazon Prime show that I can't mention the name of right now, but it obviously has to do with dancers. But we were downstairs, like level -5, where they've got these big wooden wheels, cogs, where they actually lift the scene up and down, that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And I'm just sitting there going, wow.
I think in cool. The Musée d'Orsay, there's what do you call it, like a cross-section of the Paris Opera House.
Right.
I think I know what you're talking about, seeing it from that huge cross...
Huge wheels, like, I don't know how big they are. You couldn't get 4 guys put their arms around. Big spikes out of them. You just imagine these guys just winding the scenes up and down during the show.
Imagine how, like you talked about being a history geek, I am a bit as well. Imagine how many things are below Paris that we don't know about. Yeah. I mean, they know they're there, but there are things we don't know, things they're uncovering underneath Paris. Yeah. The name for your next documentary, Scott Hillier.
Beneath Paris.
There's something in there. But look, I want to say thanks for coming in the studio. It's always nice to talk to another Australian in Paris. Yeah. And best of luck with the film festival. And
you're going to get some tickets, so hopefully you come along. But I also just have to say, I mean, what you're doing is amazing. I listened to a couple of your podcasts before. Good, your enthusiasm and your love for Paris, and I'm sure we could both talk about the negative sides of it. But it's a nice thing.
We'll save that one for off the air. But yes, we can talk storytelling and stories afterwards. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
So there you have it, Scott Hillier from the European Independent Film Festival. Once again, 19th, 20th and 21st of April. You can go and see 53 films over 3 days for €25. Or I've got 5 tickets in my hand. Here's what I'm going to do. The first 2 people to email me, you're going to have to find my email address somehow. The first 2 people who email me and say, I would like the tickets, I'll give 3 tickets to the first email, 2 tickets to the second one. And, well, there you go. You can go and enjoy the show. Thank you to Scott for leaving those tickets with me. And thank you to everybody for listening to the Earful Tower podcast. It's always a pleasure sharing Paris with you. Merci beaucoup. I'll be back again with another episode next Monday. Thanks to Press Maxon for the music that you hear all season long. And as for you, wherever you are, have a wonderful week.